beyond just the marketing opportunities, I think that Astro Bot is incredibly good as a video game. Again, for two reasons. One of which is because it harkens back to this, I want to say now like slightly older era of video games where it's kind of like mascot platformers like defining a whole bunch of stuff, right? So think about Crash, think about Sly, think about Jack and Daxter, think about Spyro, right? But also think about Mario and think about Sonic, but Sonic isn't necessarily the best representative of of that part of the generation. But the point of these games wasn't just to have mascot platformers, it was that they were platformers that were, first of all, relatively experimental. They were doing new kinds of things, but also they were reflections of what had already been established as working incredibly well in the genre before them. Right? So different kinds of platforming challenges, different kinds of levels. These games slowly became more immersive, like Jack and Daxter, especially compared to Crash Bandicoot, right? Like Jack and Daxter had like cutscenes, like interacting with NPCs and stuff, and made you feel like you were part of this interconnected world, which they expanded on even more with, I think it's just called Jak 2, not Jack and Daxter 2. But I think Astro Bot harkens back to a lot of that, where it's taking a lot of what worked and then expanding upon it in like these really interesting ways. But the ways that it expands upon those things is incredibly important, because Astro Bot doesn't just expand upon these things by having an interesting world, though that's part of it. But more than that, the game is brave enough to expand upon prior platforming mechanics, right? In incredibly simple ways. And that's something that sounds really, really, really simplistic, but it actually requires a high degree of sophistication. Because if you think about it, like in Mario, for example, jumping in Mario is a given, right? It's obvious. You jump in Mario. No fucking duh. But the important part about jumping in Mario is not the jump itself. Plenty of other platformers have jump mechanics. It's the way that the jumping feels. Even all the way back in Mario 1, the jump feels kind of floaty and like you have control over Mario in the air, but not completely. And he kind of like goes kind of far and he has like these like startup jumping animations and then he like lands again and all that kind of stuff. And the difficulty with implementing such a basic mechanic like that in a platformer is that you have to consider every single way that it fits into the game, not just in terms of like a given level or something like that, but in terms of the basic game feel. How does it feel in the controller, right? Like when you're actually pressing the buttons, does it feel good to do? The immediate feedback that happens, what are the sound effects like, right? And every single one of those decisions affects every single other decision you can make down the line in terms of level design, right? If you decide that the jump needs to be this high and this far, and that's like the maximum cap, every single level has to be designed with respect to that. Right. And so Astro Bot, in doing things like, for example, like the floaty thing with the lasers, in having Astro Bot having all those different transformations, right, where he can like balloon up and all these different kinds of things, having those very fundamental, and it's not things that are revolutionary. They're not necessarily like crazy new, but they're just new enough to build upon what was already there that worked and introduce new and exciting things that keeps the player engaged and makes it feel like it's a platformer that's not just like repeating what came before, but actually is attempting to engage with the genre in a unique way. And to have the bravery to do that and then still go into your levels and try to design the best levels that you reasonably can that are balanced around all of these different types of mechanics, all of these different types of power-ups, as well as, you know, the fact that you can like jump at a certain height and the fact that you can float and the fact that you have the lasers and everything, right? They have to consider, because think about it. If Astro Bot can float, you have to make sure that no part of any level has a point where Astro Bot can, like, in a 3D video game, has a point where Astro Bot can, like, the player can, like, jump out of the level, can clip into wall geometry, can go, can hit an invisible wall, ideally. Ideally, you don't want players hitting invisible walls, especially in super concentrated games like that. Every single minute part of the game has to be designed around that kind of stuff, and they did it incredibly well. And so I think that because of that, Astro Bot deserved Game of the Year. Good ass video game.